Hey everybody, welcome to Culinary Characters Unlocked. I'm David Page. On this episode, she moved to Europe to get a master's degree in biomedical engineering, then discovered the food over there, and became a James Beard Award-winning restaurateur in Asheville, North Carolina. Here's Chef Katie Button. Chef, how are you? Thank you for joining me.
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Well, how long have you lived in Asheville?
We moved here in January of 2010.
And you have a thriving restaurant group there.
Yes, yeah.
I will ask you to pronounce the name of it because I love Spain. I think I pronounce Spanish properly, but I don't know what the hell that accent mark is doing over the U. So pronounce it for me.
It's Cúrate.
Cúrate.
Yes, perfect.
Which means what?
Well, it's funny because it's not really an expression that's used in Spanish. I mean, you can make it happen, but it means to like heal yourself or take care of yourself. We kind of created it out of the words curar and then obviously yourself. Because I think restaurants and eating and food are about, spending time with friends and family, and it's healing and it creates memories. So,
have you always had an interest in food?
Well, actually, yes. I have loved food my entire life. I was, my mother ran a catering business out of my childhood home growing up. So my home was like full of the incredible, smells, sounds of cooking all the time. And, you'd go in the freezer and grab a pint that you thought was ice cream and it's, chicken broth and things like that. So,
but the tip for those who don't know, chicken broth with whipped cream and hot chocolate is great. So
exactly.
Yeah,
that's right. But, it took me a while to realize that I wanted or could do it professionally. I think I thought of it as just...
Well, you grew up where?
I grew up in northern New Jersey, Mountain Lake. So that is anyway where I spent most of my childhood.
So what was your mom catering? What kind of foods were coming out of that kitchen?
Oh gosh, she did a bunch of different things. She'd make some of the things I remember. She'd make this like beef tenderloin dish and, a pilaf with asparagus and bacon and things, a little phyllo wrapped triangles. I mean, they were very of the moment, like of that time and generation.
Okay. So your mother was cooking rice pilaf with God knows what for her catering gigs. What was she cooking you at home?
I mean, I ate great. Well, okay. So there were days that I ate great, particularly when there was like catering leftovers and I would like bring these elaborate lunch boxes with baked brie and stuff to school that, my teachers would envy. And then there were days when she would, order like Boston Market or like, get Chinese food because she was cooking all the time. And so for us, it was like, in fact, she used to joke and say that she didn't spend enough time cooking for us because she was cooking for work. And now that I'm kind of in a similar field, I understand that dilemma greatly. So it becomes maybe like the last thing you want to do when you're doing it all the time. So I get her like need to move fast and throw together burritos or taco night.
Well, I consider myself a pretty good amateur cook, and my wife's favorite remains takeout Chinese. So, okay, so you're growing up with a mom who was deeply into food. Was your dad?
Oh, he loved food. Yeah. He had like a couple favorite dishes. I mean, I think like in most families, he wanted to be the grill master. So he would do all the grilling, which I think is kind of a typical ridiculous gender divide. But very typical. And then he also made eggs. He was like the scrambled egg. And then he would make linguine with clam sauce. That was like his one dish that he could make all the time. And it was delicious.
Well, it's a tough dish. Here's some pasta. Here's some clams. See ya.
Exactly.
Okay, so when did your interest in food as a child turn into an avocation? Because if I recall, that was not the topic of your master's degree.
You were correct. Yeah, I have a master's degree in biomedical engineering.
Well, actually, you as we'll discuss, you worked for some molecular cooks, so maybe it helped. Anyway, where did you go to school?
I went to Cornell and University and studied chemical and biomolecular engineering and minored in biomedical engineering there.
Poland is known for the best hospitality program in America. Yes, very well done.
I know, exactly.
So did you like work in restaurants as a kid? Did you, when you were in college?
No.
Standard story is I was working in the cafeteria and I realized I should do,
Nope. I was not the one who, was a dishwasher at 16 and then moved in. No, that is the standard.
So what happened?
It was after I got my master's degree. Actually, really the light bulb started going off for me while I was in Paris.
That's right. Your master's was in Paris?
At École Centrale in Paris, yeah.
So apparently you speak French.
Yeah, I used to very, very, very well. So, but it's Spanish has replaced my French in my brain. But I do love food, different cultures. And when I was there, it was pretty lonely. I mean, I was there alone. Doing this master's degree. It was all in French. There's the language thing that you're trying, a cultural thing that you're trying. I didn't know anybody there. And
other than that, it sounds like a truly remarkable experience.
I mean, it was a growth building experience, resilience, whatever experience. And it was tough. And it was definitely lonely. And in order to kind of save myself, I was cooking, and because I'd have the weekends and I didn't have a lot of friends and I was there in this other country, and you'd go out and do the sightseeing and see the Eiffel Tower. But once you'd done it, it was what am I going to do this weekend? And I bought this ridiculously huge tome of professional French cooking. And then I would go to the different markets. I happened to live around the corner from Rue Mouffetard, which is one of the best market streets in Paris, in a small studio apartment, and I would pick up ingredients and then I would cook. And so on the weekends, I would, teach myself things like how to make puff pastry and caramel and just a variety, how to make a whole rack of lamb. And then I'd have to give it to people because it was just me, which was challenging, but people really loved that. So I cooked a lot.
Nice to meet you. Would you like a rack of lamb?
Exactly.
Okay, but were you inspired by going to restaurants locally, or as a grad student, you couldn't afford it?
I couldn't eat out. Yeah, I couldn't afford to eat out. I was already racking up, honestly, credit card debt on these cookbooks and raw ingredients, like a whole fish and stuff. And I just was spending, it was how I spent my time. So no, I was not going out. I was just teaching myself alone in this apartment. And I had to get creative. It was a studio apartment. So I would use the floor as a countertop space because I didn't have enough countertop space, and, kind of bleach it and tape it off and then didn't walk on it. And but the key is that moment in time made me realize that this was not just a hobby. It's I really loved it. And all I wanted to do was cook. And I was dreaming of culinary schools when I was there. I mean, I was reading Julia Child books and just thinking, and her story, right, about finding her path in Paris to cooking, resonated so much to me.
While working as a spy or a clerk to a spy or whatever the story really was.
Exactly. Then it took me a couple years later. I almost started a PhD program, actually. I got...
What, rocket science, nuclear physics, what?
Close. Neuroscience. One of those.
Good Lord.
I know. I've always been a little bit of an overachiever.
Have you now, you think?
In if someone tells me it's hard and difficult to do, then I want to do it, even if it may not be, even if I didn't really think it through, what I actually wanted to do, which again, that's important to learn eventually. So it felt like the moment I was I'm either going to do this and keep doing it. And to be fair, I was miserable. I mean, I was pushing my, cooking to keep my sanity, but I was not happy. I was not enjoying what I was doing. And I felt, just alone and isolated and unsure of my future. Like a lot of people in their early 20s. I mean, I was 24, 25, and it was overwhelming. And then I just made the decision. I was I am not going to jump in to a PhD program and spend the rest of my life in science. And I dropped out. And it was the first time I'd done anything like that. I happened to be in Washington, D.C., right outside of Washington, D.C., had an apartment I'd put a lease on. So I paid a lease on. So I had to find a job. because I had to make good on this lease and stay there. And I wanted to because I didn't know what else I wanted to do and I needed to figure it out. And I immediately thought restaurants, one, because I thought, they're, as you hear, a lot of people's first jobs, at the end, it's true. It was mine too. And, it's like, I was thinking about that and I started applying to restaurants in DC. And a lot of them, and I was applying as a server because it was just, I thought that was an easier way with no professional cooking experience, but it's my love of food that made me think about applying for restaurants. And honestly, the only restaurant in DC that would give me a job, like a PhD dropout resume, no restaurant experience, a job, was one of José Andrés' restaurants, Cafe Atlantico Mini Bar.
The legendary José Andrés.
Yes, the legendary
One of
José
the greatest chefs on the planet and one of the greatest humanitarians. Other than that, no big deal.
Yes, exactly. And so, which was neat because, first of all, it's part of my journey to Spanish food and why in the end I end up cooking solely Spanish food professionally. But also Minibar was a incredible choice because now it's its own restaurant, but they were doing molecular gastronomy at the time, which is like science meets food. And they still do those techniques in the current Minibar. And it's like rethinking food in a way that you've never thought of it. But they're using things like liquid nitrogen and little scales, weighing powder by the gram to make like emulsifications and different kind of jellies, like an olive that looks like an olive but bursts in your mouth.
Did your science training actually help you get this gig?
So I don't think it got me in the door at Cafe Atlantico Mini Bar. I got that gig because they had this unique way of hiring where instead of just looking at somebody's resume, they handed out a quiz. And it asked a bunch of questions about food and restaurants. And I failed all the restaurant questions, like what does 86 mean? Because I'd never worked in a restaurant and didn't know that meant you were out of something. But I aced all the questions like name, 5 different types of mushrooms and, name different wine varietals and grape varietals and things like that. Like I aced it and you could see my love of food. And that's really why I got the job. But how I got my next job, which was at El Bulli in Spain, which was one of the best restaurants in the world at the time, or the best restaurant in the world.
Well, it topped the controversial 50 best restaurants list.
5 times, I think.
Yeah, and they've changed the rules now. You can't win again.
Really? Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah,
wow.
To a great extent because of him.
Ferran, Adrià. Yeah. He ruined it for everybody else by taking it 5 times in a row.
So you're working as a server at a José Andrés restaurant. And your next step is to go to Spain and work at the place considered the best in the world. How'd you pull that off?
Well, so while I was working at Cafe Atlantico Mini Bar, El Bulli was only open 6 months out of the year. And then the other 6 months when it was closed, its chefs and front of house service managers would go out in the world. And a lot of them came to Jose in Washington, D.C. and would help out. They were learning English. They were contributing to dish creation and ideas. And so and a lot of them came to Mini Bar specifically. So while I was there, I got to meet those chefs, and I got to understand, I learned what El Bulli was for the first time. And I asked about working there in the front of the house. And I think because I was a server. And I think it was my science background that, gave me that opportunity. I also met my current business partner, Felix Meana, and he was also a front of house manager at El Bulli. And he's the one really who sparked in my mind, hey, why don't you come and work at El Bulli in the front of the house? And they, at that time, had never had an English-speaking server, but they had a ton, mother language English speaking. They'd have lots of servers who spoke English, but they'd never had a native English speaker working as a server in their restaurant before. And they had a ton of international guests. In fact, a large majority of them were English speaking.
But the restaurant ran in Spanish. And your other
Yes.
language at that time was French. So did you start picking Spanish on the ground there?
I did, actually. I started Rosetta Stone before traveling over there and was studying it on the side. And then in the mornings before I would go to work, because they only spoke Spanish. And Ferran Adrià only spoke Spanish. And so when you were in the kitchen taking a dish, to take it to a table, it was being explained to you in Spanish. And I remember there was one major mistake that I made because I didn't understand what the chef told me about a dish I was taking out to the table. And therefore, brought the wrong dish to an allergy table, which of course is like the worst mistake that you can make. Fortunately, it wasn't serious and we caught it.
No one died.
No, we caught it before it actually became a problem, but it was highly stressful and maybe a mistake that I will never forget. It's like those are the service nightmares that you continue to have about those kinds of issues that happen.
At what point did someone say, maybe she should be cooking? Or did you ask?
So, that was me. Yeah. I mean, when I was at Cafe Atlantico minibar, I would ask to go in the kitchen and learn what they were doing. And on my days off, or I would come in a couple hours early and I would help out because I was really interested. I remember first learning how to braise short ribs, in the Cafe Atlantico kitchen and all the steps for braising. And when I was at El Bulli serving also, I just was like watching with envy the 50 cooks that were in that kitchen. And there were 50 of them to 50 diners. And I was just watching them day in, day out, wishing that I was on the other side. And so I started asking, like, what do I need to do in order to come back here specifically and work in the kitchen? Because I also thought it was incredible, this like science meets food combination. And I had a lot of skill in that.
Was it a quiet kitchen? When I was in the kitchen at Alinea, another 3-star molecular gastronomy joint, and it was quiet. It was like the quietest kitchen. There was no yelling. What was it like El Bulli?
At El Bulli, it was completely silent. I mean, minibar was inside of another restaurant, so it was kind of bustling, but the kitchen at El Bulli was totally silent. You would only hear whoever, and the point was so that you could hear the chef calling out the dishes, and you weren't allowed to talk other than that. But then everybody would just execute the things. And I remember asking Ferran and Adrià is Ferran's brother, and he was running the pastry side. And I was specifically interested in pastry, what I needed to do to come back and work in the kitchen. And he told me I needed to get experience. And obviously, but there was one day that I was grabbing a dish off of the station, and it had a lot of the dishes had a bunch of garnishes on them. And this was this dish called nenúfares, which means lily pads. And it had these like nasturtium petals and like a broth and a bunch of different beautiful garnishes. It was finished with amaranth, which is a grain. And I remember looking at the dish right as I was about to take it, and the chef was telling me to take it. And I said, this is missing the amaranth, because I'd seen it go out. And Adrià looked at me and he was like, you can come back. I was like, great.
Oh my God.
It was an amazing moment.
Your life changed.
It did. He still wanted me to get experience, which I did go do, but he let me come back that following year.
Which raises the following question. Does nasturtium taste like anything?
Yeah, it's peppery.
Okay. It became the ingredient for about 10 minutes. So
It did. Yeah.
Okay. So where did you get your cooking experience before you came back to El Bulli?
My parents happened to be in New York City. So I went and I slept on their sofa and I interned at Jean-Georges, because the incredible thing is once you come back with El Bulli on your resume, even in a front of house service capacity, right? It opens a lot of doors. And so I interned at Jean-Georges with Johnny Uzzini, who was the pastry chef there at the time in their pastry department. And I learned a ton. I mean, I worked there every day, just like, learning all these different pastry techniques, how to make marshmallow, a variety of different things. I remember specifically the precision around pastry is what I loved so much. It reminded me of science and the following of kind of lab protocols. And then from there, I was there for a few months, and then the Bazaar by José Andrés was opening in Los Angeles that year. So I went cross country to Los Angeles and worked, because I wanted some savory experience. I worked as a line cook at the Bazaar. So I took kind of that experience from Jean-Georges plus, the experience that I'd had working at Cafe Atlantico as a server.
You must have shown remarkable innate talent. You
know what it is? I learn quickly, I pay attention, and I pay attention to detail. And the truth is, when you go into a restaurant, any restaurant, like, sure, there's a benefit of base knowledge, but every chef wants their thing done their way. And so you still have to learn their way. And so for me, it was like I would just learn their way, and that would be then the way that I learned any new cooking skill. But I was really good at repeating pretty identically the steps and methods that were shown to me. And I think that comes from my science. I mean, you have to do that. You have to be able to repeat things, and precision is really important, and attention to detail is really important. And so I think it was those things that made me a fast learner. And I was pretty good at multitasking, very focused. And so I succeeded in each of the positions that I had, and therefore was able to take a glowing recommendation to the next thing that I did.
So you go back to El Bulli.
I go back to El Bulli to work in the kitchen.
As a line cook?
Yes. Yeah. Everyone's line cooks except for, there were a couple sous chefs but they were all, all the line cooks were interns. I mean, it was basically kind of like school for all of the line cooks. There were about 50 of us.
Were you paid, or was it a stage?
No, it's unpaid. I mean, they helped you with housing and some things, and it was in partnership with the school there, but it was unpaid. Yeah. I mean, you're just there to learn.
That aspect of fine dining, the use of unpaid labor, has been lumped into that basket of crap that has gone on for a long time in the restaurant business and is now getting better, I am told. Any views on that? I mean, it takes a lot of people to make this kind of food.
I have mixed feelings about it. For me, because I had a master's degree and had done so much schooling, going to culinary school was not an option. Like, there was no way I was going to be able to pay for 4 more years of school to go to culinary school. So in that situation, if I wanted to cook, I mean, nobody's going to give me a paid job with zero experience. An apprenticeship is a thing, and has been a thing, oftentimes unpaid, as a way of schooling. So I used my opportunities interning at Jean-Georges, interning at El Bulli, as my culinary education. And therefore, it made sense that it was unpaid, and really greatly benefited me and my ability to then open my own restaurant and just get a base set of skill quicker than I would have been able to without it, for sure.
Are there any rules, laws, revelations that are key to what you do that you specifically picked up from one of those big name chefs?
Absolutely. I mean, in all of them, it's that you, as chefs and line cooks, you are not creating things. You are not given a blanket, make me marshmallows or make me mashed potatoes even, and then you're supposed to go and just make mashed potatoes. No, because every single thing should be exactly the same for each and every diner that comes in. And therefore, you basically every recipe and every prep is precise. I mean, it's weighed out by grams. There is no guessing. There's temperature markers, there's visual markers, and it's all very specific.
It's more like baking than what we think of as you have freedom to play when you're cooking.
Exactly. And every single dish in every restaurant that I ever worked at was detailed down to the most minute garnish detail of how it's prepared. And I learned that. And I think it was the most important skill that I learned. It also really tied in well with my skill set from science and just what, that kind of protocol, recipe protocol, I got it. So then when we later opened Cúrate in Asheville, North Carolina, as a Spanish restaurant, every time you developed a recipe, we documented it and it was perfectly documented. So then it could be scaled up, and the quality and the consistency is one of the most important things in a restaurant that gets you to keep coming back, because you come back and if you had a good experience, you want a similar experience to what you had the last time, and you don't want it to fluctuate.
Drew Needporant from Nobu explained to me, he said, look, I live in a relatively rural area in northern New York City. He said, I go to this one place and I have the same pasta every time. He said, that's what people do at restaurants.
That's right. And then they want it to taste exactly the same as they remembered it the last time.
Well, but see, that's interesting. That's the difference between a pro and an amateur. I'll bring something to the table and my wife and I will eat, and I'll say, this is the best I've ever made these short ribs, but I have no idea why, so I can't do it next time.
Right.
It's always a crapshoot. One of the great determinants for Michelin stars is consistency.
Yes.
How do you teach a chef not to be creative?
In my experience, it wasn't an option. And I think oftentimes cooks, when they're starting out, they have a dream of this romantic, creative view of what it's like to be a chef. And the truth is that, yes, when you're creating a restaurant concept, yes, there's like a moment, this like pop of a moment when you're developing the initial menu and figuring those things out of creative energy and ideating. That is fun. But once you're through that moment, all the rest of it, which honestly is what matters more, is how you repeat exactly what you did the same way each and every time, or improve upon it and then repeat it the same way each and every time.
Or think you're improving upon it and then the diners reject it. It's like when Shake Shack tried to go to fresh French fries and the clientele wanted those frozen fries they knew and loved. So, I mean, what happens when you have an epiphany and the diners say, not so much?
I think you have to pay attention to that, because in the end, I mean, we're in the service industry, so it's about serving. And what was interesting though, because at El Bulli, I did not get that lesson. I mean, Ferran would purposefully take dishes so far that he knew people wouldn't like them. And then he, like a lychee soup, right? That looks like a soup that looks like lychee soup, but the balls of what you think are like sweet, delicious lychee that you're about to take a bite of are spicy radish. And then you just, your brain can't make it happen. So you don't want to eat it. And he would count how many dishes came back full from a lot of, but he would say a certain percentage of the menu needs to push people. And so it's worth it because they had an experience. Even though it was negative, it was like an experience. And in that way, what he did was a little more art.
When they call you the best restaurant in the world, you get a little leeway.
That's right.
Yeah, you do what you want. It's fine.
Right. The rest of us need to follow our diner's lead. Yeah.
Okay. So was there ever an off night at El Bulli?
Yeah.
Because look, I've been to expensive tasting restaurants that I loved. I mean, I didn't like 11 Madison Park. I thought it was just rote. So what happens at El Bulli when someone has come for the meal of their dreams and it ain't quite right that night?
I don't know that I ever experienced like the food side not being right. Now, there were nights when the tension in the kitchen was higher.
Oh, tell me about that.
Just like something went wrong in the beginning that set us back and timing's off. And there's just like, you can just feel it, even though there's still no talking, it's like the tone of the expediter has changed. And
so it's a husband and wife. What's wrong? Nothing.
Right.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Exactly. Nothing's wrong. Yeah.
Exactly.
Will you tell me on Tuesday?
Exactly. And you could just feel it. And it was stressful, and then you're on extra edge not to mess up, because you're just like, oh my gosh, if something goes wrong, it's going to be, the failure of the night. And anyway, someone's going to get really mad. But I don't think it ever reached the diners. Like there were so many of us and everything was so detailed. And the expediter, really was there to not let any mistakes go out. And at that level restaurant, they don't. I think lots of times when you get in the day in, day out of restaurants, even chefs and the person running the pass, get tired. And what happens is they see a dish come up, doesn't look quite right. And they just, it's a little, but then they let it go, and that because we're human, but,
and because there's something called food cost.
Right. Exactly. So.
Okay. So you're working for free at El Bulli, and your next step is to open a restaurant of your own in North Carolina. Would you like to explain any of that?
Yes, that is insane. And a big part of it was, during this journey, my mother had always dreamed of opening her own restaurant. She just had never had that opportunity. And so while I was pursuing my master's degree in Paris and then going on to maybe start a PhD program, she was actually going back to school to get a degree in restaurant management because it was her dream. And this was even before I was, had switched directions.
You come from a very unusual family.
I know.
And more power to them, but yes. That's amazing.
And so, it was basically when she saw me switching into food, she got really excited. And also I had met my business partner, Felix Miana, who was a front of house genius. He had been a front of house manager at El Bulli and we had fallen in love. We later opened these businesses together, get married, have kids, get divorced. We're still business partners, but we have it's like a whole journey that we have been on together. He's one of my best friends in life for sure, but he's definitely a big part of this story and also a big part of why Spain, he's Spanish, and why we opened a Spanish tapas restaurant in Asheville together.
You're both in the kitchen at El Bulli and you look at each other and go, A, we should get married, and B, let's open a place of our own in America.
Basically, yes, exactly.
And why Asheville? Was your mother living there or something?
No, but I was born in South Carolina, and she remembered Asheville, North Carolina from when I was like a little girl, and they would come up, and it was this incredible community. And she and I we'd been talking about opening a restaurant together for a couple of years at this point, like in between these kind of work moments at El Bulli and other places. And we went all over North Carolina and South Carolina looking for a place to open a restaurant, because we realized if you're going to open your own business, you can move. And we'd originally started looking in the Northeast, which is where I was from, but felt incredibly competitive and incredibly expensive. And all of this is kind of why then we started looking back towards the Southeast, the other part of the US that I had family. My grandparents were still in South Carolina, my grandmother anyway. And we ended up driving around North Carolina and coming into Asheville. And it just was obvious that this was the place. Like Asheville, for those who have not been here, is this incredibly vibrant, creative community. There's this beautiful historic downtown, but it's like, and the rolling mountains and rivers. I mean, you've got nature and you've got art, and it's full of musicians and people who are just creating their life here because they're passionate about what they would do and because they want to be here, whether that's restaurants or breweries or small farmers or cheesemakers, or it's just full pottery. It's full of creativity and passion, and that is just obvious when you come through here. So we knew we wanted to be here.
And you knew you wanted to do a tapas place?
Well, originally the plan was Felix and I literally were going to come to Asheville to help my mother open her restaurant. Like, this is how this started, because she wanted to have a restaurant, and we came down here to help her out, and we were talking about the concept. And then it just I don't know, it was like, it made more sense for all of us to just do it and create it together. And as soon as Felix and I had input on the idea of the restaurant, Spanish food had been the only food I'd cooked professionally up until that point.
Well, hold on. Are you calling the menu at El Bulli Spanish food?
Well, I mean,
this is molecular gastronomy. Well, Spanish food is you have pan con tomate.
Right, I know. Yeah, but I was having that at Felix's mom's house and making tortillas and albondigas and things.
The Spanish tortillas, which are basically inverted omelets with potatoes in them, and are the single greatest dish outside of pastrami on rye at Katz's that has ever been invented. Am I wrong?
No, you were not wrong.
Good.
Spot on.
It's funny, on our last trip to Spain, I had a dish I'd never had before, barnacles.
Oh, the percebes, yeah.
They're like lobster. I mean, they're tiny, but what anyway. So when you were not cooking things that blew up and emitted smoke and changed shape, you were becoming, I guess, a fan of Spanish cuisine.
Yes, and tapas in particular.
Which you define as what?
I mean, I would say, there are a set of tapas dishes, right, that very clearly define Spanish tapas. And that's like ensaladilla rusa, which is like a potato salad, croquetas, which are these fried, bechamel-filled, creamy fritters, bechamel and some, protein, usually like chicken or ham or something, and the tortilla española.
You're not including that phenomenal ham sliced right from the bone.
Yes, I know. Yeah, okay. I definitely include that.
Okay, fine.
And then I'd say, so there's a set of these like very traditional Spanish dishes, and I could keep going on. I mean, there's more than what I just mentioned.
It was a plate of olives.
Right, exactly. And there's escalivada, which is the roasted vegetables with a vinaigrette. And, there's this plate of dishes, this like set of dishes that are very traditional and authentic and tied very specifically to Spain. And then beyond that, Spanish cuisine is finding the best ingredients. And in Spain, they are blessed with the Mediterranean and also just like, the Iberico pork and pigs, they have so many incredible ingredients. And Spanish cooking is really preparing those ingredients very simply. I mean, it's olive oil, salt, maybe some parsley, maybe a little garlic, maybe lemon juice, sometimes less, not all of those things at once. Like it's just a couple of things. And that is Spanish food.
So you pick Asheville. You and your then husband and still business partner decide to open a tapas joint. Was it named Cúrate?
Yeah, that was our first restaurant was Cúrate. Yeah.
How'd you source the ingredients?
So that is a good question. We went to a variety of like food shows. So the Fancy Food Show in particular and some others, and we would go through the Spain aisles and meet the importers of products. And then we would talk to the importers, connect them with a distributor in our area, and then be able to get the products or order them direct from the importer. We had to go out because when we first got to Asheville, we could not get any Spanish products delivered through regular, food service routes. They just weren't coming to us. So, and that has changed so much over the years, just by our specific demand. But we were able to find a lot of products by going to these food shows and asking to be able to get them in Asheville.
So you open a tapas bar, and the people of Asheville react how?
They love it. Oh my gosh, they love it. I mean, in the very early days, we got a little bit of, and probably because in the early days, I was more sensitive to the negative comments and reviews. Like I would pour through them and they would really,
Oh, those left-handed compliment reviews, while not as authentic as a visit to Spain,
right.
This is the best. Yeah. Okay, fine.
Things like that. Or, I don't know, there were some about it being too expensive or where's the salsa and chips and,
where's the mariachi band? Yeah. No, it's not Mexican. Sorry.
But really, the community welcomed us with open arms and the people who visited did too. They were like really dying for something like exactly what we brought. And that was really special. I think it's the vibrancy also and I love tapas. What I love about it is that you order a bunch of things and you share them. And my favorite part about that is because when you're sharing bites of dishes with the same people at your table, it brings the conversation and focus to the food together and this like collective experience. And you might talk about other things, but in between that, you're grabbing a bite of octopus and then telling the person next to you across from you, like, oh my gosh, isn't this the most tender octopus you've ever had? And, and it amplifies the kind of shared dining experience, I think.
Well, I don't trust people who won't share food.
I love that. I feel exactly the same way.
Even I look askance at those who won't take a bite off your fork. I'm not carrying anything that bad. I mean, come on.
That's right. Yes.
Okay, so you start with tapas, and now you've grown to how many Spanish restaurants?
Well, we have 2 restaurants, but we have a bunch of other businesses. So we do trips and tours to Spain with Cúrate trips. We have a wine club. We have Cúrate at home where we sell charcuterie, but also other products like some knives from Barcelona and things like that tie in paella kits and other things. So an e-commerce business, we're getting into wholesaling our Spanish brand of charcuterie, which is exciting. So it's 2 restaurants, but then a variety of other businesses that kind of all amplify each other.
Okay. What's the other restaurant?
La Bodega by Cúrate.
And what's that menu?
Spanish, of course, but a little bit more Basque in influence.
Which means what? More mutton?
Pinchos and things. So it's like, pinchos are little bites on skewers or toast. So it's like if you've ever been to San Sebastian, one of the places that I love most, you pop into bars and they have the bars are full of food out on the counter. And you walk up and they're little like toasts or skewers with bites on them. And you come up and you grab them and you keep the toothpicks that have been like holding the bites together. So whether it's
and that's how you pay?
Yes, exactly. It's honor system. You collect them. And
try that. Okay.
Exactly. So, but that's a little bit more. We do more of the pincho experience and the wine menus, more of that northern Spain, Galicia, Basque Country wine menu. The dishes are also a little bit heartier and like the braised oxtail on a thin Spanish tortilla. And, they're just a little bit richer, more share friendly.
I read somewhere, it might have been the New York Times, that oxtail, which was once a throwaway part, hence cheap, good food, has become expensive because people are using it again.
I mean, I'm a big fan of oxtail, so it makes sense. And there is only one tail, so that's,
Good point.
if people are into it, then, it's going to go fast. It is delicious, though.
What's the best dish you make at either of the restaurants? Or what's your favorite dish? Or what's the public's favorite dish? Brag about your food.
That's a great question. I mean, I would say at Cúrate, it's the rosajat negro. It's a squid ink pasta. So it's served in a paella pan, and rosajat, instead of being rice, is a noodle. So it's very thin, short noodles.
This is intrinsically Spanish? I've never heard of it.
Well, it's Catalan, yes. Rosajat is specifically Catalan. It's similar to like fideuà, which is Spanish, and also with a little bit fatter noodle. It's very thin. You toast the noodles first, and then they are cooked with this rich house-made seafood stock that we make with crab bodies and lobster and like fish. And it's just incredible. A little bit of squid ink. We saute squid in it and then cook it until all the liquid is reduced. And the noodles, they actually like stand up on end like little hairs. It's delicious. It's like, that's kind of part of why the dish is named how it is. But anyway, it's one of the most, it's like the essence of the ocean in the freshest, cleanest way. It's absolutely divine.
Does squid ink have a specific flavor, or is it just a coloring ingredient?
It does. It's like a briny, deeper umami. So it like adds a little bit deeper level of that kind of essence of the ocean flavor, makes the dish richer.
Brag about another dish. I'm really digging this. I'm about to get on a plane.
So one of the most popular dishes, which is funny because I never thought eggplant would be one of our most popular dishes, but it's a fried eggplant dish. And it comes from the area of Malaga in the south of Spain. And it's basically, traditionally, it is lightly fried eggplant with cane syrup. In Asheville, though, we top it with local honey because that's what we have, and rosemary. So it's just this like really crisp, creamy eggplant drizzled in honey. So it's that salty, sweet flavor combination that people just love. And and then I would say a third one of my favorites is a seasonal soup that comes around in the spring. It's called an ajo blanco. It's also from the south of Spain, and it's a chilled almond and garlic soup, sometimes called white gazpacho because it's a cold kind of almond-based soup with a little bit of sherry vinegar and olive oil. And we serve it with crab and a little bit of like green grape granita. Usually in the south of Spain, it's served with sliced green grapes. I like that like granita ice. And then we also add a little bit of Pedro Jimenez reduction. Pedro Jimenez is a sweet sherry wine. And when you reduce it down, it's got this raisiny kind of flavor to it. And so that it kind of pairs with that green grape. And so you get the sweetness, you get the savoriness of the soup and the crab. And it is one of I think that is hands down maybe my favorite dish that I've ever made.
Why isn't Spanish cuisine higher on the list of American favorites?
I think that's a great question. It's like one of the cuisines we haven't Americanized yet. Like it's like a little bit later, right? Because we got Italian American food. I definitely say there are American versions of French food. Like, we're like riffing at home now.
Well, we built a cuisine by evolving and changing the dishes brought here by immigrants. And we haven't done that to Spanish food. And I think, and this is going to sound terrible, I think among some people, it's confused with Mexican food.
I mean, that is true. But for people, and what I always say to somebody who is initially confused by that, which I understand because it's a language confusion, because they're like, they both speak Spanish, so there must be a relationship. And, go long way back, there is food relationships, but what I always tell people is I was like, if you're thinking about what Spanish food is, think about where it's located geographically. It's south of France. It's right next to Italy, and it's north of Africa. And therefore, the food is very much a mix of all of those cultures. And that is what makes Spanish food unique.
And phenomenal. And just,
yes.
What a great country. So tell me about your efforts to help your community after that terrible, terrible hurricane.
Yes. When Hurricane Helene came through, whole parts of Asheville have been wiped out. The River Arts District, Biltmore Village, those physical areas are going to take forever to rebuild. And it took us a day to kind of hit on Friday, Saturday, I got a phone call from the World Central Kitchen team. So the day after the storm hit, saying that they were already activating a kitchen in downtown Asheville. And since downtown Asheville still had power, was out of water, but had power, they needed more kitchens to feed the community because they were coming in to help because they knew how bad it was. We were still trying to understand how bad it was, and they knew because they're experts in this. And they asked us to help out. And so by Sunday, and they said they needed meals starting Sunday. So by Sunday, we were able to get some of our employees together, and we turned Cúrate into a production facility for meals for the community. And it really was amazing because it gave us something that felt incredibly useful to be doing in a moment when we were uncertain what to do. I mean, it just was so overwhelming that your head's spinning and you're confused and in a state of shock. And so just to have this thing to focus on that was helpful, that like gave us a feeling of like doing something that we know how to do, which is cook and do that for the community. For our sanity, it was like incredibly wonderful, and our community as well.
Here's to rebuilding and coming back stronger than ever.
Thank you. Yes, Asheville will. It is an incredible place. And I know that its ethos of small independent businesses and creative, passionate entrepreneurs will drive it back in that same path.
Well, Chef, it's been a delight chatting with you. And I'm jonesing for some really good Spanish food. So
take a flight to Asheville. We're ready.
I might surprise you.
Please do.
Katie Button on Culinary Characters Unlocked. I'm David Page, and I'll see you next time.